So, so yesterday, or at least for the past couple of days, as I adjust something here, guys, I've been talking about Archie Sonic Forever, and this is basically one of the fan comics that takes place in the Archie Sonic verse, but also at the same time it's taking place in the Archie Sonic verse, tackles some things that were not tackled before. Now, initially, I thought, okay, it's going to be a series, of stories and everything that intertwine with some of the official main stories from, the official main book back when it was going, back when it was going on, like, interconnecting certain threads of the Mecha Sally arc that we didn't know about, or didn't see, or, it was never, addressed or be bothered to be addressed by Ian Flynn and his crew, stuff like that. As well as tackle, maybe some of that same kind of material with earlier stories or even, post stories, that came before and after the Mecha Sally arc and before and after the Worlds Collide crossover with Mega Man. Well, one of the people that are working on the book called, on Discord called Bubbly Bumblebee, who's been watching my videos for quite some time, direct messaged me and had to correct me on what it's really about. Now, I do appreciate, Bubbly Bumblebee and some of the staff coming out and correcting me and anybody else that might interpret this a little differently. But this is what he told me in the direct message today. At 6:07 a.m., I'm assuming Pacific time. This is what he had to say to me in response because, I'm thinking, it's going to go one way, and it just might in some cases, but, he took the time, or they took the time to straighten this out for me. And this is what one of the comic staff people on Archie Sonic Forever had to say, and I quote. This is what they said this morning at 6:07 a.m., and I quote, "Hey, been watching your videos. Neat stuff. I'm glad about all the nice things you're saying about the comic. But one thing I've noticed you're getting mixed up on is that ASF, Archie Sonic Forever, isn't meant to just be interstitial stories in between the canon or Adventures Sonic Online, which is, like I've mentioned before about Archie Sonic Online, another fan comic series, that's meant to continue certain story arcs where they were left off at certain points, and try to fill in the gaps. But this is what they said, and I quote, hey, let me reread this, okay? They say, hey, been watching your videos, neat stuff. I'm glad about all the nice things you're saying about the comic. But one thing I've noticed that you're getting mixed up on is that ASF isn't meant to be, or isn't meant, okay, let me reread this. They say, and I quote, hey, been watching your videos, neat stuff. I'm glad, okay, hold on. All right, sorry about that. It's early. It's about 9:34 in the morning. It's still early. I'm still waking up. But this is what they said, and I quote, hey, been watching your videos, neat stuff. I'm glad about all the nice things you're saying about the comic. But one thing I've noticed you're getting mixed up on is that ASF isn't meant to just be interstitial stories in between the canon or ASO, Archie Sonic Online. This is completely its own thing. And issue 1 is diving headlong into an original plot that's totally incompatible with those stories. The prologue reads as a collection of interstitials since it's meant to set up so many puzzling pieces to get to that plot. But the story going forward will be a lot more focused, and you definitely won't be able to reconcile the plot differences with other unrelated stories. It's its own things, not a companion piece. And this is what they said in conclusion. Issue 241.5 is meant to convey that it's diverging from okay, this is what they followed up on, and I quote, issue 241.5 is meant to convey that it's diverging from near the end of that particular issue. The issue, okay, Again, I do apologize. It's early, guys. I do apologize. They say, and I quote, issue 241.5, this is how they're closing it out, the direct message to me. This is how they're closing it out. They say, and I quote, issue 241.5 is meant to convey that it's diverging from near the end of that particular issue. The next issue, 242/1, a nice round number, and the plot absolutely diverges from the canon, AOS, and everything else in huge ways. So in other words, basically what he's saying here, and you could read this yourself, I'll put this in the description. What they're saying basically is what AOS is going to be, or not AOS, but what Archie Sonic Forever. Let me get that straight. Again, like I said, I apologize. It's early. I just got up a little while ago, still drinking some coffee to wake up. Like I just did there. But basically what they're saying, and I thank them again for straightening this out, is that Archie Sonic Forever, is going to be its own thing. Like it's going to have its own plot. It's going to diverge from what we would what we would expect as potential continuation and go in a different direction. That basically it's going to be its own little canon and all that. It's going to have its own stories and everything and go from there. And then all this 0th issue that they released on Free Comic Book Day did was kind of, like I mentioned earlier, intertwine a lot of what was going on at that time in that time frame by showing us certain scenarios that we didn't get to see in the original run of the comic during that story arc. Now, again, what they said to kind of help correct me is that they notice I'm getting mixed up on the fact that ASF, Archie Sonic Forever, isn't meant to just be interstitial stories in between the canon or adventure or Archie Sonic Online. And this is where they corrected me, and I thank them for this. They say this is completely its own thing. And issue one is diving headlong into an original plot that's totally incompatible with those stories. The prologue reads as a collection of interstitials since it's meant to set up so many puzzling pieces to get to that plot. But the story going forward will be a lot more focused, and you definitely won't be able to reconcile the plot differences with other unrelated stories. It's its own thing, not a companion piece. So again, basically what they're saying is, and again, I'm glad they straightened this out, is that it's going to go off and do its own thing. All right, it's kind of like when people used to, read the original Archie run of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when they were under the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventure title. Archie, did some adaptations of the first couple of episodes of the TMNT cartoon. They did their own, own adaptation of, several episodes and stuff. They did their own thing. Not their own thing, but they did their own adaptation of the TMNT the original TMNT cartoon episodes, the first 5 episodes and everything. But then afterwards, they went off, in a completely different direction. That's what they did. The same with when they had Archie. The same when Archie had Sonic. It's like there were some episodes, even short backup stories, that were adaptations of, not episodes, but there were some issues. Like I said this earlier, I do apologize. There were some issues that, if not some backup stories, instead issues of super specials that were, adaptations of Satam cartoons and everything. Satam episodes like Cry of the Wolf got a issue to itself, and then one of the backup stories in a super special adapted Ghostbusted, which was an Antoine short from the second season of Satam into a story. So, Archie Sonic has done that itself, but over time over time during its own existence, it did its own thing. Like when it first started, it was a hybrid of both Satam and Adventures. They had nothing really to go off of except maybe, getting a sneak peek at the Heads or Tails pilot, which was basically, as it's described, a pilot with the original, I guess you could say, classic designs of the characters that we saw initially in the miniseries issue 0 to 3 of Archie Sonic before it became a regular running series. But again, afterwards, even from its start, it went off and did its own thing. It did its own thing and all that, and became the success that it is because of that, even with a few adaptations and interconnecting things here and there, that to try to, at least acknowledge that the world, both in the comic and the cartoon, was the same world and somewhat the same continuity, but completely doing their own thing as well. I mean, if you want a good example of that, look how far they went with Lupe and her wolf pack in the comics compared to the cartoon. That should give you a bit of an idea of, of the comic doing its own thing. And that's kind of what we're getting here. Like, basically, this free issue that they, or quote unquote free issue, which again, I think all of them are going to be free anyway. But this free issue, this pilot issue on Free Comic Book Day, basically was filling in certain gaps of the ongoing story, at that time of issue 240 to 247. They were filling in gaps and everything and showing us scenarios that, again, as I mentioned, were never addressed or touched upon and all that. Like even having the Freedom Fighters, mostly, I think, was it in Team Fighters or Team Freedom, whatever name Sonic and Tails and Amy had adopted when they went on their journey. I mean, you have Tails there, and kind of explaining what the information they got from MonkeyCon, and coming to the conclusion that, hey, the reason Eggman is able to keep Sally under his control, even with powering, with power rings, is he somehow had to insulate her from its magic, and all they have to do is try to get through that insulation, and hey, she's back, and hey, we got to weaponize Sally on our side now temporarily to take down Eggman. They're addressing those kind of things. They're addressing Linda's situation when it comes to Eggman realizing the mistakes she's made and stuff like that. So, so that's all this pilot issue was meant to do, was try to fill in those certain gaps and everything. And what it sounds like to me is going forward, the storyline is I would assume, is going to be based in this somewhat. The canon is going to be based in this scenario somewhat, but it's going to be its own thing. Like, like for example, they may still focus, into that. They may still focus in that area, but go in a completely different direction. That's different from what the original comic did, or from what what Archie Sonic Online is doing. Basically instead of doing, okay, let's do every issue to where it's just little subplots here and there interconnecting into one. Instead, what the next one's going to be is it's going to be its own thing that I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, folks, I'm assuming still will somewhat take place, in this continuity, but be completely different. It'll be completely different. Like, I know it may not mean much, but if, they're having, let's say Linda, kind of reconsidering and realizing the mistake she made by aligning with Eggman and now realizing she needs Dimitri, that might be basically part of the storyline that goes in a direction that we would not expect. Like, that's what they're talking about. Like, they're going to take little things like that and say, okay, we're going to go in a direction with this that's completely diverges itself, separates itself from what was originally first read or what people are perceiving. And that's kind of the idea that I'm getting here. There's going to be those little bits here and there that go in a completely different direction that, we're used to. Like I said, with the whole, Tails bringing up the, fact that Eggman must have insulated Sally, in her weaponized form from being influenced by the Power Rings magic and everything that would give her back her free will, that might be something that, they go in a completely different direction with, to where, hey, that's something we never really considered, and they might be able to build upon that, by making, this its own canon. In other words, it'll seem familiar from what I'm understanding from reading that. It's going to be familiar, but it's going to be its own thing. That's what it feels like. It's going to have familiarity, but it's going to be its own thing. That's what it feels like. I mean, it's ironic that the person that can direct message me that works in the comics called Bubbly Bumblebee, obviously a Transformers fan. It's kind of like when you look at the live action Transformer movies. It's like after the last night, it's like everything just went in reverse. It's like everything is now standalone or prelude-wise, and it feels like this new set of movies, starting with Bumblebee, and now continuing with Rise of the Beast, are being its own separate thing. Like there's that familiarity and all that we're getting from it, that familiarity to where we could possibly connect, the movies as a whole together as one continuity, but it's being its own thing. In other words, these preludes are being their own thing that are completely different from what we first originally started seeing in 2007 with the first Transformer film. Excuse me there. And speaking of Transformers, you look at all the different adaptations of Transformers in comic book form or other media form. How the origins came to be, how Unicron came to be, stuff like that. And even though you can see that familiarity in some of the details, if not some of the story, it's its own it's its own different complete canon. Overall, there's no real true like, okay, this is what happens in between kind of stuff, but it's still the stuff you knew of in the past. No, it's its own separate deal, and that's what they're saying here. That's basically what the feeling I'm getting here, that it's going to be its own thing, but you're going to still get that sense of familiarity. Like if this does take place during what I consider the Mecha Sally World Tour II Death Egg Mark II arc, if this does take place in that scenario, that setting, basically what they're describing is, hey, it's not going to be the same thing. It's not going to be a companion piece. It's going to be a different kind of take. In other words, it's going to be a different canon based in that world, based in that setting. Like, we're going to basically go off and take things in these directions, if you will, that, nobody probably considered. And that's cool. That's cool to see. Because it's the same thing that I see with Team Season. Team Season is trying to adapt webcomic-wise and animation-wise the third season that Ben-Hur wanted to do, but you can definitely tell even in the animations, the WIPs, and even the webcomic, that they're going in a completely different direction. Like, yeah, it has that familiar Satam tone, which season 3, or both season 1 and 2 were known for, and obviously season 3 would have been known for, but you could tell they're going in a direction, or plan to go in a direction that's familiar, but it's its own thing. So, so that is something to really respect and appreciate, and that's kind of the idea that is being alluded to here. Like, you're gonna get completely different stories that that basically diverge, and they basically diverge and everything convene from. I think that's what they said. Let me see. Let's see here. Yeah, that's what they say. Diverging from near the end of that particular issue. In other words, it's going to go in a different direction. That's what they're saying here. So yeah, basically it's going to have familiarity to its plot, to its overall story, but it's going to go in a different direction. That's what it is. Again, going back to what I said about TMNT, Adventures, when they first got the license to that, they adapted the first several episodes of the cartoon series and all that, but then they decided to go and diverge from any plot line the cartoon would have had and do its own thing. In other words, the cartoon, the first season or two, it had a continuity, but not much. It didn't really have much of a continuity. It's like some of the episodes were standalone, but as you got closer to the end of the series or the season, they did have a connection, and you could see that. Like in the third season, you had all the episodes starting with the big, everything, like the big the big break-in, the big, blowout, stuff like that. You had that interconnection there, but most of them were still loosely adapted. It was still loosely, not loosely adapted, but it was still, loosely their own thing, like filler and all that. And, basically what the comic did is they decided, no, we're not going to do loose, loose issues, filler issues here and there. No. We're going to go off and do our own thing. We're going to diverge from that. And that's what they did. And that's how we got characters like the Mighty Mutant Animals. That's how we got a very popular character in Ninjara, Umiko, if you will. Yumiko. That's how we got her as Raphael's love interest. We got a love interest for him in the cartoon with Mona Lisa, but this one was an ongoing love interest that was basically part of the team. Part of the family, part of the team, for quite some time. So you got that. Like I said, you got the Mighty Mutant Animals. You got stories that were a lot more darker and mature in tone, unlike the cartoon, was, until it attempted to do somewhat like that in the later Red Sky seasons. But the point is, when Archie had the TMNT, license, they went off and, after adapting those episodes, they went off and did their own thing. They did, and that was the one thing that made Archie Sonic very popular. That, as I mentioned, it adapted several things from the Saturday AM cartoon, and all that, as well as kind of was a hybrid at first of both Adventures and Saturday AM. But then after starting to get more Saturday AM-like and bringing in certain writers, whether you like the writers or you don't, even to this day, some do or don't, they started to, at a certain point, go off and not only be, very Saturday AM-like, more Saturday AM-like, but go off and start doing their own thing, outside of what Saturday AM was known for. And the rest is history. So again, I see and I thank the people over at Archie Sonic Forever, mostly Bubbly Bumblebee, for straightening this out. Because what it sounds like to me, mainly at the end of the day, is what this was, this prologue pilot issue, 241.5, was its setup for basically a canon, a continuity that's identical, but is different, and it's its own thing. That's what they're alluding to. Like, it's identical, this familiarity, but it's its own thing. It's going to do its own thing. It's going to go in a direction that diverges, from what basically you originally knew. Like, basically adapting, or not adapting, but touching upon things that were not touched upon and expanding on it, if you will. Like I said, the Linda situation, the situation of, hey, the power rings, might be, the power rings influence to give a roboticized person the free will back is being blocked somehow, and that Sally can't get her free will back or else she'd have it, and stuff like that. So basically it's things like that sound like to me, or seem like to me, will be expanded on in further issues, as this kind of has that familiar tone, but it goes in its own different direction of telling the story and getting to the conclusion that it should have gotten to long before, and not drag it out, as they jokingly said in the about section on the website. They want to basically get to the point to where it's not dragged out. Like, let's say someone trying to do something similar to the Star Wars saga and all that. So anyway, though, I know this audio video has gone a lot longer than it should have. I do apologize for that. I really do. But I wanted to come on here and just, read off. Bumblebee directly messaged me to correct me on this and kind of give you an idea of what I'm getting out of that message, and everything, because it does sound like, what this really is, it's taking a familiar setting in a familiar story arc, but making it its own, different canon, its own different continuity, but going in directions, diverging, in different directions than from what the original story was. So, yeah, again, I appreciate that and everything. And I do recommend, guys, that you check it out and all that. Check out the story. I think you'll really appreciate it. And you'll kind of see what, Bubbly Bumblebee and the others working on the story are basically alluding at. That, yes, it does feel like it's going to be a companion piece, but it's not. It's going to be its own thing to where you get that familiar setting, that familiar story, but it's going to be done differently. It's going to be its own, version of the story. It's not going to be connected, to anything that happened in the official book. It's not going to be connected to anything that happens, in Adventures of Sonic Online or anything else. It's going to be its own thing that basically goes in directions, that the original story or any continuation of what, or any continuations or what would do or have done. That's what I'm trying to say. But anyway, though, guys, that's all I really wanted to say. Again, shout out to Bubbly Bumblebee for directly messaging me on that. I really appreciate it to straighten it out and kind of give me an idea of what, was originally planned. And Bubbly Bumblebee, if you are watching or listening to this, correct me again if I did misinterpret anything. I would really appreciate that if you could correct me on anything I may have misinterpreted or not. But I am kind of getting that feeling that, that's what you mean by the fact that, hey, it's going to be its own thing, and that it's going to diverge from what we've originally seen previously, or from what others are trying to do in their own continuation ways and all that. But anyway, though, guys, check out the comic and everything. Links will be provided in the description. Also, links to where you guys can support me are going to be in the description. I'd be greatly appreciative if you could support me in those areas, guys, during this transitional time of change, where I'm trying to find employment and everything, as we speak. But yeah, guys, check it out. Support them. Support the comic and all that. Really appreciate it. And I do apologize for being a little all over the place. Like I said, it's early. It's 2 minutes to 10. It's 9:58 a.m. Pacific time on this Tuesday, May 9th. 2 minutes to 10 a.m. that is. So I do apologize. I'm still kind of waking up and all that. But guys, let me know what your thoughts are. Comment below. Live chat during the premiere. Love to hear from each and every one of you on this. And again, support them with the comic, as well as you can support me down below. And everything, links to the comic to support them, that will be there as well as links to where you can support me in this transitional change. But until next time, guys, I will talk to y'all later.